recording. Fantastic. So we'll just move that over to the side there.
Is that a Skype program, or recording through Skype? Or
yeah, recording through Skype, yep.
I should learn that. It's good. I usually have a little dictaphone exterior to the sound that I do, but the quality would be better to record.
Yeah, I can send you the link.
Yeah, that'd be good.
So, yeah, I'll get into it. But so yeah, thank you so much for making the time to have a chat with us today.
It's okay. I always enjoy connecting with the community and anyone. Basically, I do get a lot of people every week in my inbox wanting to know more about shamanism and South America and planning trips and wanting advice or things like that. But it's good. I always enjoy sharing whatever knowledge I have.
Fantastic. And are there a lot of people from Australia going over there to have experiences with ayahuasca?
Yeah, definitely.
Why do you think that is?
Well, it's not just Australia. It's all around the world. Are we starting? Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay, right. Basically, I mean, it goes all the way back to basically the roots of modern culture. Pre-industrial revolution or I guess a culture which has distanced itself from the earth. I mean, the original Latin definition of religion is to reconnect, which is funny in a way because that implies that originally before reconnection we had a connection. But, in 50% of people in the world now statistically live in cities, and there's a very much a degradation of the soul that happens there. It's the global culture we live in is a paradigm envisaged, in the Industrial Revolution when the middle classes before the middle classes existed, when they needed people to fill the factories. So we've really got a very mechanized assembly line, materialist culture. And, it's been evolving, but the way at the core of it, that there's not something which is what we would perhaps call soul. There's not something which nurtures the soul or nurtures the spirit. And in my opinion, it's no coincidence that something that comes from the jungle, something that comes from it's not a pristine environment, but an environment which is still has its integrity, its ecosystem integrity to a large degree, ignoring logging and things like that, which are very real concerns. But it still has some type of, if we have spirit and the earth has spirit, the jungle has a spirit. And this medicine from the jungle, ayahuasca, is rapidly, disseminating itself. It's seeding itself across the planet because there's a supply and demand. There's an equal and opposite reaction happening where you can't push things on people. There's got to be a will. There's got to be an intent and a need in the soul, in the global soul. And so what I see is this distancing with modern religions all across the world, that people are feeling disenchanted from them. People are feeling unfulfilled from them. They're feeling very rote and very hollow. And they're wanting to connect to something real, to something that actually makes them feel more themselves or feel at ease, not at dis-ease. And then also hopefully to connect them through their spirit to something larger than themselves. And what you learn in the jungle is that you're embedded in an ecosystem. You're embedded in this alive entity all around you. The breath of the mother is visible all around. And on ayahuasca, many, many things happen. But one of the things I've learned that can have is like a deep connection to the web of life and to feeling your place in that spiritual ecology.
Beautiful. And can you tell me about how you came to know ayahuasca or how you began your spiritual journey?
Well, the spiritual journey is a long one, I guess. I mean, I think we're all on a spiritual journey, but not all of us realize that there's a lot of terminology, I guess, in New Age circles or in the thing which still doesn't have a name, this new culture that we're living in, basically. We're seeing, all around us, but it still doesn't quite have a name. New Age is very 70s and 80s. I call it the ultra culture, to give it a name, because I'm a journalist. But my spiritual path is just my life path, but it's where does a person awaken, and where does a person have that glimpse of something larger? I came through the counterculture, I guess, which I still don't like the term nowadays for counterculture because we're not counter to anything, and I feel that we're coming into this world age of unification and awakening and a oneness, this realization that we are all one, the whole James Lovelock Gaia hypothesis that says we are one living enteleki, one living organism on the planet. I've had my psychedelic roots. I've come through the counterculture, as I said. You know, I've been a journalist and a participant, a very active participant in that. But that was all a process of self-discovery, and I've really noticed a lot of people along the way who have been into hedonism, and I've definitely had my share of hedonism, but it's always been with a spiritual and a mental sort of platform or agenda to really try to dig deeper and to know more. So what I've discovered, you know, in my path, the counterculture led me on to awareness of ayahuasca and awareness that these modalities were out there. As a journalist, I went over to Peru in 2006 and found basically the crest of probably the second wave of ayahuasca shamanism was happening over in Peru at that time. The first wave probably happened about 10, 15 years before that, when the first gringos went over, and it was very much esoteric and very much deep in the jungles and isolated curanderos or shamans. But when I went in 2006 to the annual Amazonian Shaman Conference in Iquitos, I was reporting on that for a magazine, and it was a good introduction to learn, like a snapshot in one go, who all the curanderos were, what this business of ayahuasca tourism was, and what was the spirituality behind the business. In the years since, it's only intensified, it's only peaked, that the business of spirituality and the business of ayahuasca shamanism in Peru and now around the world is exponentially increasing. It's just, it's the new rubber boom, you know, for South America. It's the new oil boom. It's a product which pretty much everyone wants, even if they don't know it yet, in the sense that it works. You know, it works on a very deep spiritual level and a very beautiful opening heart level for many people. So it's something which everyone can utilize if they're ready for it. It's not for everyone, perhaps, until they're ready on their own spiritual journey, but it is available for everyone. So what I've learned basically is that ayahuasca is being used as a commodity in the West. I mean, as the Western paradigm of consumerism and commercialism discovers spirituality again in the jungles of South America, there's this culture clash happening where the West gives money and, you know, the old country gives spirit. And in a way, there's no other way for that to happen, you know, because the West has gone through successive waves of colonization and eradication of many cultures that held these secrets to earth magic, basically, through the plants, through the sacraments of the earth. I mean, ayahuasca is not the only one by far. There's basically gaia, as I mentioned before, which is James Lovelock's term, from the Greek term for the planet, for Mother Earth. In Peru, they call it Pachamama. But Mother Earth basically supports and secretes substances, whether that's, you know, water, air, or plant material. There's a theory that calls the plants exopheromones, and, you know, pheromones are a chemical language to communicate with interspecies, within or without species. So there's a theory that the planet is actually communicating through the plants to the humans, and not just the humans. There's evidence of other animals eating ayahuasca vine or gnawing on the vine and having that, as well as other plants. But, you know, you have psilocybin magic mushrooms, which were revered by Mesoamericans. You have Salvia divinorum, revered again as well. You have even tobacco, which is revered in South America and Peru, the Mapacho Nicotina rustica, the organic 19% tobacco. And, you know, a multitude of plants, many of which contain DMT, which is a very interesting ingredient, which is in our brains and all throughout nature as a neurotransmitter. But the difference in the West is that everything we have come into contact throughout all of our history, we have debased, we have made profane. You know, we've taken the sacred out of. Even tobacco. Look at something as simple as tobacco, where it becomes a commodity. So there is a danger happening at the moment where ayahuasca is becoming a commodity in the West. But there is a larger intelligence behind this, as I've been trying to communicate about the planet and Gaia, where it doesn't care what our ism is. If we're socialists or capitalists or whatever, it's getting the message out. So the trade-off is actually beneficial and synergistic for both parties. As the West commercializes, it is actually being changed at the same time. And that change is happening, you know, it's like an invisible seedbed underneath all our culture. I have this analogy that I mentioned in my book. From my first travels to Peru in 2006, the result was basically a book called Shamanic Odyssey, which is available on Amazon or elsewhere. But basically, I have this analogy that says in the 60s, acid opened the mind for a whole generation, and a whole lot of social changes disseminated from that. In the 80s, we had ecstasy that opened the heart, and in the noughts, we've had ayahuasca and the other plant entheogens opening the soul. And it's a shorthand soundbite, but it's trying to give this idea of successive waves over generations when we were so distanced from the plant world, from the vegetal kingdom in the 1950s and 60s, say, that we needed a man-made chemical, which was invented by Albert Hofmann, or discovered by Albert Hofmann, which was actually one molecule different from a very natural LSA, morning glory liliquai seeds used by Mesoamericans as well. Basically, nature conspired to find a way into the lab to get this first wave of seeding out, then the second wave of seeding happens, and then the third wave of seeding happens. You can almost look at, human culture and Gaian culture as successive waves of permaculture, to use a permaculture idea of maximizing yields and using the energies about. Imagine if the planet was maximizing the yields of its output, and at the moment humanity seems to be the cutting edge of the output, building that next layer of the internet and the new sphere of electronic consciousness. But it's also, utilizing resources in the most efficient way. So when the monkeys get out of control and start to go across the planet and start to cause ecological destruction, it's going to regulate that with the exopheromones of the plants, which need to come back into consciousness and are doing that at the moment.
Okay, beautiful. Wow, you really know how to talk about this.
This is what I do. This is what I do.
What is a shaman, and who is a shaman? And do you see yourself as a shaman?
Usually I say no, but I'm going to say yes, because I've had a coffee and I feel in a sort of adversarial role. I think you're a shaman. I think everyone who sees this is a shaman, and that includes, therefore, I am a shaman. Basically, here's the deal, right? In many Indigenous cultures around the world, before we had medicines, commercial medicines in the West, before we had before we outsourced to big pharma, basically, someone in the village had to take care of the health of the body and the soul. From what I've learned from ayahuasca shamanism, in Peru they call them curanderos, which is from the Spanish to heal or to cure. They use many, many plants, like hundreds to thousands of plants. The jungle is their pharmacopoeia. It's their hospital. It's their everything. From the wealth of the jungle, and you look at the key etymology of words like, the wealth of the soil, or the banks or the levee. Like a lot of our terminology in the West comes from nature itself for wealth and health. But basically, someone had to be in charge of healing people and keeping people healthy. Now, there's this whole idea of dis-ease. Again, in the language, it's right there. It's like if you are at ease, if you are living in concert with the earth, in the right relationship with the earth, which many Indigenous people do, then you're not going to get a lot of the Western diseases, a lot of the things that we have bottlenecked up in our bodies. Now, the curanderos and the shamans of Peru, from what I've learned, believe that there's an energy body, and there's an emotional body, and then there's a physical body, and there may be other layers as well. But basically, dis-ease begins at an energetic level. It doesn't begin at a physical level where things happen. Everything happens on basically an implicate level, to use quantum terminology, where we are in a projection of the explicate of an implicate order. And on a micro scale on our bodies, that's reflected in the fact that we have these energy bodies. That's where true health and true integrity happens, and dis-ease and emotional things that get lodged and things that happen. There's also a flip side to that, as well as health. There's also unhealthiness, but there's also ability through shamanism to create impairments in the body and to create, like they call it brujeria, it's like black magic. It's the ability to cause illness in another person. So there has to be that, that yin-yang flip side to it. But basically, here's the idea. There used to be shamans, there used to be people in the villages which were pretty much, well, I'm trying to look at the Western cultures like hierarchies. Everything's specialized, everything's outsourced now. But I feel like we're going back to this model of a village model, like the global village, where you may have a chief, and you may have a shaman, but they're sort of replaceable roles, and they don't carry the same weight in the same way as they do in the West. They sort of do in the modern culture, but there's maybe it's mythical or maybe it's an idealized version. But there's this whole idea that when you're a tribe out in the jungle, you're on your own and everyone is equal to a certain degree. They have their pecking order, I'm sure. But not anyone can be the shaman. They had to be trained, they had to be sensitive, they had to be very in the jungle, away from, when you take ayahuasca, you're on dieta, it's called. You reduce your intake of sugar, salt, sex, alcohol, meat, anything that can actually affect or change your energetic level. So you're stripping yourself back to basically base frequency of your energy body. Some people are more vibrationally or energetically attuned than others, and those people would be, it could be genetic or it could be entrained by the soul of their parents. So it was often a hereditary role. Now that was really needed. Now in the West, we have the same need for health, even though it's been outsourced to big pharma and to medicine on the outside. It's like religion. It's not satisfying. It's not working. So we have these abilities, and the West has often pigeonholed and stigmatized people with shamanic abilities or with different headspaces as mentally ill. And we don't have a paradigm that accepts these people. So there are potentially, if there's something like 1 shaman per 100 in a normal village, that 1 in 100 ratio on the global village is, my math is really bad, but it's something in the merits of, say, 100 million potential healers or shamans, and this is where the language comes in. Shaman is actually, an anthropological term from the 1900s, comes from Siberia, but it's been imported into the West, and now we're projecting it on the people in Peru. But the point I'm getting at is, potentially everyone is a shaman, because potentially everyone has access to their energy body and can heal themselves. And I don't think we're necessarily trying to replicate this pristine, noble savage idea of let's all be shamans in this beautiful little village in concert with nature. That'd be nice. Maybe there's an element of that. But what I'm trying to get at is, I think there's this slow motion mass awakening happening in Western culture, where everyone is attuning to their own inner spirit and their own ability to be something larger than we see in Western culture, 20th century type of paradigm. Basically a shamanic being, or a shamanaut maybe. And, the shaman had many roles in Indigenous culture. He was a healer, he or she was a healer, traveler between the worlds, a priest, almost a psychotherapist, and someone who would train with the plants. The plants that open up these abilities and help do the healing, basically they sing to the shaman. They sing their ikaro, or their vibrational code. And the vibrational code is the thing which does the healing in the song, and that allows the shaman to travel with their will along the vibration, carry a wave of the vibration to effect healing on the energetic level. They might replace a heart or a liver or a lung, or blow out some blockage in your energy body. Or they may use plants on your physical body to help nurture on the physical level. But what I'm getting to is that behind the shaman and behind the plants and the ayahuasca is energy and is light and the light body. And we're coming up to this time in humanity's awakening as the Earth goes through its 26,000-year orbit, and we come back to full cycle and alignment with galactic center. And I won't ever mention that date, that number, which is coming up very imminently. But what it means astronomically, verifiably, scientifically, factually, is that we are entering a very high density, but basically cosmic ray radiation. We're being fed by galactic sun, and the sun's being fed, and that's feeding on the Earth in Gurdjieffian theory, and it's feeding everyone on the planet. I mean, it's verifiable fact if you look at astrophysics and NASA websites and what's going on, is that we are basically being bombarded with more than we've had since 26,000 years ago. The solar sunspot activity is on the rise. The sun feeds the plants. The sun can feed us. What the plants have been doing for the last 20 years or so is awakening this generation of shamanauts to tap them into their own innate abilities in preparation, I believe, for the times we are now living in, for the imminent mass coronal solar flare ejection galactivation of the species.
Sorry. Whew. Can you repeat that one again?
Never the same trick twice. No, I can't. I'm sorry. Mass coronal solar flare ejection galactivation of the species. What I'm saying is the human organism is more than we think it is, and we all have this ability. It's not micro level of like let's heal ourselves of a disease. What I'm envisaging and seeing happening is this basically species activation, where it's not about we have this idea of you have to be sick to be healed. What if we're okay and we can actually be more? It's not just being sick, it's actually becoming more than we are at the moment, which is what happens if you look at the, the anthropological and the, I guess, the genetic code, and over time mutations happen right on schedule, and we're coming into this time, and I'm pitching here a synergy between the Gaian intellect, the Gaian intelligence behind the planet, nurturing the humans to this level of species awareness through the plants in a very short amount of time in the last few generations, in preparation for what the shamans do on their journeys, is to go, astral traveling and into the cosmos and into the galactic ecosystem. But I think we all have it within us, and on that level, I would like to say that we are all potential shamans.
Right. Yeah, that word curandero, which is, the person that cures, that person that brings the healing, I think is one that needs to really be put out there, because just using shaman could mean so many things, and people say, these urban shamans, and, it just could, but curandero is so specific to ayahuasca, I think, especially, and specific to South America. And that's what we're really trying to research here is, methods of healing, but not only healing people that are diseased in some way, that you can see material, the material body is somehow sick, but just that idea that we're all here working on something. We're alive, we're on a spiritual path, working on healing ourselves in the sense of becoming better, always working on ourselves to develop spiritually. And I think that, it's interesting because we've spoken to so many people from all kinds of different faiths, and that is the underlying trajectory of their path, is the healing, is always working to be a better person, working to transcend in some way. But of course, when we talk about ayahuasca, there are so many people that disagree with the use of the plants, and they say, you don't need that to transcend, you don't need that to feel the connection with the earth. What do you say to that?
Well, there's always denialists of every ism, Theoretically, in a perfect world, we don't need anything, but do we even need oxygen? This is what I'm saying. It's like, basically, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. I mean, that's again an egocentric approach of the human saying, I believe and I'm going to project upon you, you don't believe what I say you don't need. The planet, something larger than us, Mother Earth, is secreting these substances and these plants to be used. I mean, you go back to the origins of how did ayahuasca shamanism evolve. You look at people like Jeremy Narby, the anthropologist, who has researched and discussed this. And, it's statistically improbable, if not impossible, that this thing could happen. You have to take the Banisteriopsis carpi vine, crush it down, boil it in water, and then you have to add another admixture plant containing DMT, like chacruna or chakraponga, which there are many of in the jungle. But you have to actually, from the vast cornucopia of the jungle, which probably contains hundreds of thousands at a minimum of plants, you have to stumble across the right two to combine in the right way to make ayahuasca. Now, Western people don't understand how this has happened, and when they've asked the curanderos, the shamans, they say very simply, well, the plants told us. And they're like, oh yeah, right, whatever. But the plants do. The plants have intelligence, and the plants communicate to us. And behind the individual plant intelligence is the collective Gaian Mother Earth Pachamama intelligence. Now, I wouldn't want to shoot the horse in the mouth, the gift horse in the mouth, and say, thanks for this beautiful spiritual offering of this plant, this essence of the planet. Terence McKenna had a riff that the planet has a plan that evolves the plants. It's the plan-plant-planet thing, connection. I mean, it's there in the words again, but I think it actually goes back to probably Christian guilt. I mean, you look at it again, it's the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I mean, there's some type of myth in history that says, don't take the plants. Who created that? Who benefits from that? What culture have we become because we listen to that? I mean, take the plants with respect, take the plants with knowledge, and hopefully with elder guidance. And this is one of the core things that's happening with ayahuasca shamanism that didn't happen in the 60s, is that there is now this connection to a culture which has the elders, it has the framework in place for us to go and learn. So as well as the mass wave of ayahuasca tourism, and this isn't like, your average 20-something middle-class type person going, oh, I'm going to go to the jungle on adventure tourism and do ayahuasca. There's an element of that creeping in, but en masse, it's seekers who are going to the jungles who already have a spiritual path. People who aren't a seeker on at least some level probably won't be interested in ayahuasca and will just do the jungle tour, But what I'm saying is the people who are already at the vibrational level of awakening and awareness are finding the things that they're attracted to in the right perfect manifestation. And I'm not pushing this on anyone and saying everyone should do it, but almost in a scientific, reductionist way, it's like, try it, see what happens for yourself. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. It may not be for everyone. There's a tribe, a very famous tribe in the Andes around Cusco of Peru called the Quiero, and they don't use ayahuasca. They don't even use the San Pedro cactus, which is revered throughout the area as another plant entheogen to connect to the divine. They actually are sensitive enough that they just interact with energy itself. And they actually live very high up in the mountains. They have for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They were not conquered by the conquistadors or by the later waves of commercialization. But again, it gets back to the light. They actually live high up in the mountains where the light activates their energy body. So they don't need the plants. The plants, the stones, everything are just interfaces the planet gives us to connect to the thing behind the plants and behind even the planet. So on one level, those people are right. You don't need these things. But it's like learning to ride a bike. We may need the training wheels. It doesn't hurt. And especially because they are incredible, loving and healing modalities to use. But eventually, this is like the acid again in the 60s. We don't need another acid revolution. But God, we did need it then. We needed those training wheels. We needed to detourn from the culture we were becoming back then of this militaristic, consumeristic, narrow paradigm, which really has continued. But it's scaling networks that we've now got almost 7 billion people on the planet. There's a critical mass of people who have been activated over the last 3 generations by, and we're not even going to use the word drugs, but by sacraments or by catalysts, whether that is the sunlight or whether that is the LSD or whether that is the ayahuasca or the meditation or the tantric sex or the art or the ecology movement or the human rights movement or the activism. Whatever it is, life will feed you. Life will give you this wind beneath your sails. But there's also a very short target window for survival of the species and for getting enough of a critical mass together at the right point in time to take advantage of what's coming up astronomically very, very, very imminently. So I feel the planet knows this. It has a larger intelligence behind it, and it has been finding a way to activate a mass sampling of humanity to try and share its knowledge and share its wisdom and love, to tune us in, to regulate us with its exopheromones, to be ready for what's about to come. So we might not need it if we have 20 years to meditate like a Zen monk and learn how to do it that way. And the Zen monks don't need it. But I mean, we can use it. And also, if you do meditate and use modalities like that, you will actually go a lot deeper in ayahuasca and everything synergizes, and everything you can do to self-improve yourself is self-improving and will help in the larger picture.
Absolutely. All right. And one thing that I was quite surprised, being South American myself, and coming from a culture that if you want to learn about these things, you should go deep into the jungle and stay there for a very long time with someone very experienced to teach you. I was surprised that a few colleges here in Australia are offering a diploma in shamanism, and there's also different people from all over the world who come back after being in Peru for several months and start their own circles and start also training other people as well to become shamans. What do you think about that?
To quote Charles Dickens, it was the best of times and the worst of times. Look, it's great that there are schools for shamanism. They're not plant-based shamanism schools when they're, in the face of the mainstream public legal entities, but all pathways lead to God eventually. They give a really good grounding in, maybe perhaps dream shamanism, symbology, the drum, the trance state. things like that. All those pathways are incredibly valid and have been used by shamans across the planet, mainly in regions that haven't had plant entheogens. If you look even back to Siberia when they've had the Amanita muscaria mushrooms, there's, because of climate change and things like that, there's been times when the plants die off and the need to connect to spirit remains. So they've discovered other ways through dance and trance and things to get in, maybe not as deep, I don't know, but maybe as deep, maybe it works for them. So all those schools are good. The second thing is that there's a duty of care. I mean, a lot of people, there's an ayahuasca honeymoon phase almost, where people get very enamored and very overwhelmed by just the life-changing experience they've gone through. Now, you know, if the people who go, say, to South America, maybe 10% of the tourists are into ayahuasca, and maybe 1% of that 10% stay on the path and stay, and you know, it trickles down statistically to basically, again, that 1%, and that 1% is the people who are genuine seekers, who have the calling to be a healer, a shaman, a facilitator in their local communities. To get back at that statistics again, that 1 in 100 thing, if there's one shaman per 100 people in an average village, then on the planet, yeah, we need 100 million shamans. We need 100 million people around the planet, nodally in their communities, to look after their communities, to resonate in their local communities, to create that carrier wave which envelops the planet. That is happening. It's happening beautifully. It's happening, I was going to say perfectly. It is in a perfect world, but obviously there can be a lot of fallout because people aren't well trained. To be a proper curandero in Peru takes a minimum of 10, 20 years. To be a bunko shaman takes 40 years. They've handed down knowledge. They're in the environment. They're taught by the plants and the intelligences behind the plants. A lot of these people, even though they are the correct 1% who should be doing this, they're getting a crash course in Shamanism 101. That's why I guess I call them shamanauts versus shamans. And the dynamics are all different. The way to operate in the West is all different. You know, there's the money-based economy, there's the cities, there's the hierarchies. It's okay to evolve what we learn in the jungles with respect and integrity to what works in the urban archipelagos of modern world. It can't happen. You can't do a dieta where you are away from, you know, stress and the bad diet of the West and electromagnetic frequencies and all the pressure and stuff of the West out in the jungle in a little hut for 3 months. You can't do that in the cities. You can't do that here. So what's happening is basically probably a more shallow, you know, example of shamanism. We're getting maybe a deep inoculation of it, but maybe not as pronounced and as sustained as we would get in the jungles. But I feel that the vegetal intelligence behind everything is seeding ayahuasca across the world. And the ultimate teacher is ayahuasca itself, is Madre. They call it the mother, and the intelligence in the mother. And she knows what she's doing, you know? So I've got very good friends who are shamanic practitioners who live here in the Byron Shire. I know people all across Australia and all across the world who are shamanic practitioners. 5 years ago, I knew these people and they weren't shamanic practitioners. You know, it's like it's like they're being called to it. And usually it's with an enormous amount of integrity and respect. And they're making mistakes and they're making joy as well. And it has to evolve this way because we've had a disconnect. It's like many Indigenous cultures when there's been a genocide happening or eradication of culture and the elders are lost. We're getting a brief little inoculation and connection with the South American elders, and they're also not saints. They're also very, very flawed people, the curanderos. They're humans. It's like trying to deify our local GP. You know, they've got their own dramas and scandals as well. But what we can learn and what we can integrate and what we can run with is this basic framework of what it's about, and then it's going to be a lifelong path to actually fully be the healers that I see this generation sprouting and becoming.
Yeah. And as we were talking about the other day in regards to the legalities of using ayahuasca in Australia, I know that there are groups such as Santo Daime that established religious groups, you know, in Brazil and other parts of the world, but in Australia they keep it quite small, and they also they don't like to talk too much about what they do. Also, the UDV as a religious body, they're no longer holding sessions here in Australia because of the legalities behind drinking the vegetal. And how do you see this going forward here?
Well, there's law, L-A-W, and there's law, L-O-R-E. And L-O-R-E law is the original law. It's the planet's law. It's a human conceit. All man-made laws in Western cultures actually, go back to maritime law and countries, and they go back to this idea that there's a king or a hierarchy interceding between us and God. They all go back to God. So what we're seeing here is a massive religious, spiritual movement, global in scope, that is getting rid of the middleman. It is connecting to God. It is connecting to the goddess behind the God. And we don't need permission to do that. This is an innate human drive. This is what it's all about. Now, in the small print, there's going to be some issues. There's going to be some nitty-gritties. In the majority of countries around the world, ayahuasca is actually in a grey area of the law. It's only in a very few that it's actually technically legislated against, basically because it's not a chemical. It's not something which is extracted. It's definitely not a drug. It's a medicine. It's a plant medicine revered for thousands of years. It has the most fundamental character and fundamental references, in a way, because it is being used by Indigenous people as this sacred medicine. And this goes back to the hypocrisy of Western cultures and the war on drugs, which was started by Richard Nixon in 1971. I mean, hello. I mean, can we see this? As you know, we can argue about marijuana and medical marijuana and legalizing things. Again, that's another sacrament. The Rastafarians use that. In the West, we have not been allowed to use any substance which alters our consciousness and connects us to something larger. Why? I mean, this goes back to the fundamentals of, are we in a democracy? Are we in a free market? Or are we in some type of invisible dictatorship? I mean, you've got to ask. Civil disobedience comes because there's a need for us to be human. Now, to get into the nitty-gritty, Santo Daime have been doing an amazing job. They have established religions across the world. They spring from the Brazilian and Peruvian jungles. They're almost 100 years old, and they're a synergistic Christian ayahuasca church. They use the framework of the Christian religion, and it is a church. I've been to Santo Daime ceremonies. You wear white, you sing songs from the prayer book, you have a sacrament like the other Catholics or Christians do, but it actually is entheogenic. It activates the divine within. I mean, that's a threat to these hollow religions and hollow politicians that don't have a real connection. It's a threat to people and the hierarchies and the homogenies that control the world, because it's the people awakening to their own power. We're not going to, all we're really doing is being us. In The Devil in the Detail, it's basically a sovereignty issue, a consciousness issue, and a religious issue, and it doesn't have to be fought. It has to be loved. It shouldn't even be engaged with an old term paradigm terminologies. It can't be dealt with fear. It has to be dealt with integrity and respect and empowerment to know that what you are doing is not just right, it's sacred. I mean, come what may, they will come around. The authorities are only the authorities because we empower them. We, the people, are speaking, this is our religion, this is our sacredness, and this is our time.
Thank you very much. Well said. All right. Wow, so nice to have a chat with you today. And
it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, let me just ask Orion here. Orion, is there anything you'd like to know? The consumerism behind it?
Spiritual practices and how it's, to be spiritual is to wear certain clothes.
Well, I think he already touched a little bit on the fact of, I guess Orion's main question is the consumerism behind these practices, and the fact that I guess people charge to take part in these ceremonies. I guess you already touched a little bit on that.
Yeah, look, people charge in Peru and in South America as well, and the shamans, as well as being healers, are also very astute businessmen who will wring out every last dollar that you have, and don't trust anyone. I mean, you've got to really discern,
Yeah.
and find the right resonance with these healers back in the jungles or back over here. It comes down to, I mean, it's a very difficult thing. I mean, we could be Jesus in the marketplace and overturn the tables, but we've got to pay the rent tomorrow. And as the system's evolving and as we are awakening en masse and things are changing rapidly, capitalism is one of the core things which is changing and needs to change.
Yeah.
And most of the healers or shamanic facilitators I know really do deeply care and do deeply want to be able to share this with as many people that need it. But they're in the same situation as we are. They need to pay the bills, keep the ship running, and run the business to keep the channels open to those who can come and receive the healing. They said in Peru that any good curandero knows that someone who is in true need of healing cannot be refused. It's not about the money. It's not about the money. They have the ability, and they owe them the spiritual connection to help them with their healing. So I would say any good healer in the West must adhere to that golden rule as well. There can be a trade of energy in whatever format. It is also becoming very lucrative in some circles, ayahuasca circles and ayahuasca ceremonies. I don't know. I also see it's sort of the natural dynamics of the world we're in. But as more and more people tune in, they're becoming empowered to hold space for their own healing and for their friends' healing. And there's a real backlash against that consumerism within the community that really wants it to be about family again, really wants it to be about healing again, and cobble together enough money to make or buy the resources or connect with the South American plants here to make it not about money. There's a very large wave of interest in doing that to get rid of the money equation. But they're the times we live in, and it's transitional. And between the caterpillar and the butterfly, there's that ugly chrysalis thing, and that's where we are now.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.